Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Looney. This podcast is called What's Your Story? It turns out that so much of what determines the way we see ourselves and see the world is how we tell our story. Getting ready to give my testimony at our church in our Celebrate Recovery meetings we call Restoration. And I've known for many years that my testimony is what reminds me of God's goodness and His power. When I hear other people share their testimonies, it's a reminder of the remarkable grace of God that can take even the darkest stories and shine light in those dark places and bring healing, hope, and help. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Joseph in the Bible. There aren't many people in the Bible that it's difficult to find anything bad to say, but I think Joseph is one of them. It's really tough to think of anything bad to say about him. Maybe he was a little braggadocious as a kid. Maybe he shouldn't have told his dreams to his brothers because they held it against him. Maybe he shouldn't have been his father's favorite and worn that coat of many colors because it created a lot of envy from his brothers. And they ended up plotting to kill him, throwing him in a pit, selling him into slavery. Not only that, when he was a slave in Egypt, he worked hard to prove himself a loyal and trustworthy servant. His master, Potiphar, loved him, but so did Potiphar's wife. She took such a loving and a liking for Joseph that she tried to seduce him. When Joseph proved to be made of stronger stuff and resisted her temptation, she accused him of trying to rape her, which sent him to prison. Once again, Joseph served well in the prison and did favors for fellow prisoners, hoping that they would remember him after their release. They didn't. Joseph had every right to be bitter, to be broken, to see himself as a victim because, to be fair, he had been victimized. He knew what slavery was about, and it was no picnic. Thankfully, Joseph held on to his faith. He never lost his conviction that God was still God and God was still good. And sure enough, Joseph's faith and his faithfulness paid off. Eventually, he was released from prison in order to tell Pharaoh the meaning of some troubling dreams. Because he proved so wise, Pharaoh put him second in command. And Joseph was used by God to bring relief from a famine in his day that pretty much saved the ancient world. Quite a remarkable story. In Joseph's story, he was neither a villain or a hero. He let God have the final say. In fact, when his brothers were shaking in their boots after their father had died, believing that now Joseph would get his revenge, when Joseph found out about their fear, he called them and said to them these words. He said, "Am I in the place of God?" He said, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Joseph knew that God was the author of his story. He knew that God was the one who had the final word, that God would make all things right. In fact, Joseph referred to the good that came out of the bad by relating to the fact that many lives were saved through a direct or indirect consequence of his suffering. Suffering produces character, and character produces hope. And the Bible says hope does not disappoint us. I don't know where you are in your story, but there are moments in my story where I feel like the chapter is pretty dark, either because I've messed up so badly or been messed over so badly. It's easy to feel like the story is so bad that there is no redemption. But of course, it's not over till it's over. And we really won't be able to write the final chapter on our story till we understand the big picture, till we look back from eternity and understand where God was in all the waste, in all the wondering, in all those wonderings about what was up. Where was God and what was he up to? It'll be only then that we can really make a final say about his goodness and his faithfulness, or about our own faithfulness and ability to endure. Don't give up too soon. Joseph could have given up way before he did, and there are moments in the story of my life when I think I could have easily given up. Many of you know that I struggled with wanting to be a girl when I was small. For many years, I identified much more strongly with women than with men. Fortunately, gender transitioning was not a thing back then. And I say it's fortunate because I believe it would have robbed me of some really valuable experiences that I've had as a man who wanted to be a woman. Even after that ceased to be such a big deal, I found myself deeply attracted to other men. And that part of my story caused me tremendous grief. It was a twist in the tale that I was not expecting, and it threw me for a big loop. I wondered how I could possibly be right with God or serve him with my struggle. And I almost threw in the towel. When I was between my first and second year of medical school, I had gotten cold feet in my relationship with Terry and broken up with her, and was dealing with a lot of shame and struggling with my sexuality. And I was very close, very close to throwing caution to the wind and pursuing life as a gay man, diving headlong into the gay lifestyle. I even had at least one Christian friend encouraging me to do so. It was about that time that my older brother ended his own life, and that was quite a shock. It brought me to a place of reckoning where I thought more deeply about eternity and about where I was on my journey on the planet and what was ultimately of value. It caused me to step back from the precipice of uh, flinging myself into the gay lifestyle. And I'm ever grateful that God used that event to wake me up to other possibilities. It was a very terrible time, and yet wonderful at the same time that I saw God intervening for me in a way that really sobered me up, if you will. I read a book a few years ago called Redirect: The Surprising New Science of Psychological Change by Timothy Wilson. If you're writing it down, that's Redirect: The Surprising New Science of Psychological Change by Timothy Wilson. He's a psychologist that has become deeply invested in learning what genuinely helps people to grow, to transform, to mature, and make healthy choices. In the book, he examines a lot of things that we think will help, but really don't. And some things we think will help that actually make us worse. But there are strategies that Dr. Wilson examines that are truly transformational and truly helpful. The main focus, in fact, of the book Redirect is the storytelling approach that, or story editing approach, I should say, that allows us to think deeply about how we tell our story, both to ourselves and to others, and to be sure that we edit our story in the best way. Of course, every day we edit our story. We can't remember everything we see or hear, everything we say or do, everything that happens to us. So we have to edit out a lot. What you edit out and what you keep in turns out to be very important. If you hold on to the bad things that happen to you, if you focus on the trauma that you experienced, or the unkind words that were said to you, the people that bullied or berated you, if you focus on your own failures or shortcomings, the ways that you are less than perfect, it will affect the story in a profound and perverse way. It will keep you in a story where you are less than likely to experience freedom, peace, and joy. On the other hand, if you choose to edit out those things and hold on to the things that were lovely, the experiences you had that were exhilarating or exciting, the comments that were made to you that were affirming or affectionate, focusing on the things that you did that were playful, helpful, joyful, and able to focus on the goodness of God in the midst of the story, both the good moments and the bad, chances are very good that the way you edit your story will lead you to look back on your life with deep satisfaction. Not because you made brilliant choices, but because you see the goodness of God and how He gave you opportunities to redirect, to repent, to renew your focus, to restore your commitments, to refresh your trust in God's goodness, in others, and in yourself. Being able to live a life of joy and peace is something that we all get to choose. And it isn't based on what is happening around us. It's an inside job. It's something that we must choose moment by moment, day by day. Is it an easy job? No, it's not. But it can be done. Think for a moment about the story of your life. Who is the hero of your story? Who is the villain in your story? Now, sometimes I've painted myself as the villain, as the one to be um, diminished or disdained. I've also tried painting myself as the hero, the one to be adored or affirmed. But I've come to believe that those two roles, for those of us who are people of faith, have already been taken. Yes, there is a villain. It's not my spouse, my child, my boss, my neighbor. It's it's not my God. It's the enemy. It's the enemy of my soul who does seek to kill, steal, and destroy, who wanders the earth like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Yes, there is an enemy in your story, and you better write him in, or you'll likely assign that role to others who don't really deserve it. There's also a hero, and I propose that in every story, when we come to the end of it, we'll look back and see that God was always the hero, the source of every good thing that we ever received. Every opportunity, every blessing, every moment of joy and peace flowed from Him as a gift to us. You don't have to wait until it's all over to look back. and see God's goodness. You can start practicing doing it now. Start with the story editing approach and look back at your story, looking for particular moments when you can see that God was at work in everything to bring about good, particularly in the bad things that happened to you. Be curious. What was God up to? If there was anything to be gained, any glory, any good in that circumstance, what might it have been? Did you take away something of value? While trauma can beat us down and cause us grave damage, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be debilitating. But for most people who go through trauma and who go through it well, trauma can lead to growth. Not everyone gets PTSD. Most of us, if we live well, can come through trauma with PTG. That's post-traumatic growth. We can look at our story before the trauma and afterward and see a distinct increase in our courage, our compassion, our resilience, our commitments to doing well. We just got back from the funeral of my best friend's wife. Both of them were friends for over 40 years, and I loved Linda as well as my buddy Dan. They have been of inestimable value to me in my life, supported me in so many ways, been financially generous, been so affirming, so supportive in everything I've done, so loving to both me and Terry. And it was traumatic seeing her suffer from bile duct cancer and eventually succumb to it, and see her body waste away. Seeing her body waste away was very difficult, sad, and painful. But even now, just a short time after her funeral, I'm already sensing a deepening in my commitment to be like my friend Linda Wilson, to be more loving, more joyful, more patient, more organized, more thoughtful, more diligent, and more committed to the kingdom of heaven. She was a remarkable person, and I believe that everyone who comes into our story has something to teach us. If we are open to it, we can learn from anybody. But particularly those people who are given over to serving God with their whole hearts have a great deal to share with us, to teach us, to inspire us. And so if you are listening to this podcast, if you're watching and you're not gaining what the people around you have to give, if you're not looking for what that person at the grocery store has to share with you or what your neighbor has to teach you, please open your heart, open your mind, and open your eyes to see those opportunities. Each night when we sleep, our brains offload a lot of information. We take out the trash, so to speak, in terms of our cognition, our thoughts, and our experiences. But we can consciously do it as well. We can consciously choose to let go of things that might bog us down, to cast aside anything that might slow us down, as the Apostle Paul urges us, to get rid of anything that's going to slow us down on our journey toward eternity. As we do that, as we edit out the bad and focus in on the good, our story is sweeter. Our path becomes brighter. Let's be like Joseph. Let's be someone who, even in the face of disappointment and discouragement, even in the face of abuse and bondage, will continue to look to God for the strength to be faithful and full of faith. I want to be like Joseph. I want to be that person whose story positions me to be able to be a blessing the way that Joseph was. I'm not going to save the ancient world like he did, but I would love to save some souls along the way. And if you don't know the author of your story, if you don't know God, if you haven't come into relationship with Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith, let me encourage you to look deeply into his claims and to the cross. His claim was that he came as a minister of God's grace. He came to serve us and to show us the depth of God's love for us, to humble himself, to be willing to die, even the horrible death of a cross, so that through his taking the natural consequences of our sin, by taking on death, we might be free to receive the natural consequences of his goodness, which is life and life forever with God. I'm excited about the future. I'm grieving the loss of my friend Linda, but I feel more committed than ever to making a difference, to letting my story be a story that glorifies and honors God, a story that is populated with people who also are on a journey toward eternity. And I want to make a difference for each of you. And if you cross my path, I want to let you make a difference for me. I want to learn all I can from you and from others, that I might grow into the full measure of the stature of Christ, to be the man that God made me to be. I'm not like you. I'm not like anybody else. We are all unique, but we all are the same too. We all have a story in which we can either be a victim or we can be a servant. Like Jesus, we can come to serve and not be served. If we try to make ourselves the hero or cast ourselves as the villain, we're sunk. But if we choose to serve, we are sure to find a good report when we end the chapter, when we end the last chapter, when we go home to be with God and look back to see how beautifully he orchestrated circumstances to serve his purpose and to bless you and me. I hope you'll get the book Redirect, The Surprising New Science of Psychological Change. I think it's fascinating. It doesn't focus on the aspect of faith, but it does look deeply into what the research says about what makes us healthier, happier, what helps us transform and live better lives. I want that for me. I want it for you. I'm committed in my podcast and the videos I produce to giving you an opportunity to take a look at how you're living your life, to make choices and shifts in direction and perspective that will enhance your understanding, enlighten your thinking, encourage your heart, and invigorate your body that you can live life to the full. I love you. Bye.